Welcome once again to the Undiscovered Games video podcast, where we take a look at the lesser-known board games of the world and share those with you. For episode 76, we're going to go back to the year 2012 with a very mean and gritty little gamers game. This is called GIZA, the Great Pyramid. Now, the box might not exactly capture your attention, but I'm here to tell you this game is tense and cutthroat in the best ways imaginable. You're going to be collectively working together with your opponents to build this big pyramid for the pharaoh, but there is nothing friendly about working together with your opponents. You are in a battleground here of moving these stones, lifting them onto the pyramid. You have to farm and fish for food and then use that food to feed your workers while also trying to leverage that food against your opponents to starve them out. The core mechanism is worker placement, but it does some neat things with worker placement that I've never seen before. You have to use your workers for all these different things at different moments in the game, and in order to use them properly, you have to get your workers to different areas of the board. And it's not like you can just jump straight there. You have to go through these different avenues to get there. So there is a little bit of planning involved in this game, but at the same time, you have to react to your opponents, which makes it a very tactical game as well. So strategy and tactics at play here, and it's a great mixture of both. There's also a very mean bidding system. The game has some once around the table bidding, as well as some blind bidding, both of which can be extremely punishing if you're not careful. So I'm going to show you all this stuff in the video today. I'm going to try to do a full tutorial because I feel like the rulebook doesn't do a good job of laying out the game. Everything is in the rulebook that you need to know, but it's just not organized very well in my opinion. So I'm going to try to show you the game as it makes sense to me, and then hopefully that helps you make it through the rulebook a little bit easier. This is for 3 to 4 players, so the player count is a bit limiting there. However, it does scale nicely with both player counts. I would say the game definitely feels meaner at 4, and I like it best at 4. Now, I was not familiar with this game designer, so I looked him up on Board Game Geek, and it turns out GIZA is his only listed game. And that really fascinates me because I think this is a brilliant little game design. It's tense, it's tight, it's thematic, has a really charming little table presence, nothing fancy, but just enough there to make it pop on the table. And most importantly, it's a player-driven game. You are taking actions directly against your opponents, and everything they do will affect what you do. Very cool design. So let me teach you how to play this, and I'll continue to talk about it. Before we do that, make sure you are subscribed right here on YouTube at undiscovered_games to learn more about lesser-known board games. This episode was voted on by the channel members, or the UGOGs as we call you, so thank you to all the members who directly support this channel to help keep it alive. Your support helps me continue finding and sharing lesser-known games on a regular basis, as well as update the video archives on a lot of old and forgotten games like this one that just did not get video content back when they were first released. So thank you to all the members. If you'd like to be a part of that, look for the join button below the video or in the video description. Try to use the link so that you join with a browser. If you join on the app, sometimes they'll charge an extra fee for using the app. So if you're on a browser, it should say $1.99 a month. Once you're all signed up, then you can use your YouTube app as usual and access all your member perks and everything like that. We have lots of fun in the membership area here on YouTube, so if you'd like to be a part of that, it would be a big help to my channel. Alrighty, let's look at GIZA, the Great Pyramid. Okay, to set up the game, each player chooses a color and takes a matching player screen in that color. They have a little color marking here. Then take all your workers in that color. You're going to put one worker on the 0 space of the score track here. You're going to put 5 of your workers up here next to this turn order grid, and then you'll take 8 workers to place in front of your screen like this. Now, in a 3-player game, you get 10 workers in front of your screen. So in a 4-player game, just put those 2 leftover workers back in the box. Each player also starts with 3 art and 8 food. The art looks like this, the food looks like this. These both come in quantities of 5s and 1s, so you can freely make change with the bank as you need to. However, you always keep your food and art hidden behind your screen. You'll notice the pyramid has 9 sections, so find the 4 base sections, they look like this, and place 1 on each sled, and put each sled in the first quarry space here. Now there's one more difference in setup for 3 players. Notice this brown track here. We do not use this track ever in a 3-player game. Instead, to set up a 3-player game, you will start with 3 sleds, each with base stones, and you will start with 1 base and 1 middle section already built on the pyramid site like this. So again, that's only in a 3-player game, and from here on out, the rest of the game is exactly the same with 3 or 4 players. The final part of setup is you choose a start player, and that player gets to put 2 workers anywhere they want on the board. And then you go clockwise around the table with each player putting 2 workers out. And you just keep repeating that process, going 2 at a time around the table until all the players have placed all their workers somewhere on the board. I will explain the different sections of the board here in a moment, but let's just say for this example, the players set up the board like this. Keep a general supply of the food tokens here and the art tokens here, and keep these pyramid stones off to the side for now. You'll need those here in a little bit. And now you're ready to start playing. Before I explain the turn structure and the rules, I want to give you a general overview of the game as well as this board so you understand what you're looking at here. Now let's look at this board from bottom to top. Down here at the bottom we have 3 support camps. On the left we have the artist camp. In the middle, we have the Temple of Ra, and on the right, we have a farming and fishing area. So there are 3 areas on the bottom. These are all areas that can hold workers, and there's no limit to how many workers can be in these 3 areas. Moving up the board, we have our quarry sites. Each quarry site can only hold 4 workers maximum. You can have as many of your workers there as you want, but you can never exceed 4. Now, when there's a sled on this quarry site, your worker will go onto the sled. So each sled, like the quarry site, can only hold a maximum of 4 workers. So starting out the game, these workers are on the sled. The workers on the sled will be pushing these sleds up the quarry track toward the pyramid building site. This quarry track has 3 squares, and your workers can be on these quarry tracks as well. I'll explain how this works in a moment, but just know that each one of these squares on the quarry track can only hold 4 workers maximum at any given time during the game. Beyond the quarry track, we have the pyramid building site here, and we also have the lifting sites over here. As soon as a sled gets pushed beyond this threshold, then the stones get delivered. If it's a base level stone, it goes right to the pyramid building site. However, if it's a middle level or the capstone, it gets delivered over here to the first lifting site. Then from this lifting site, the middle stone can be lifted up onto the pyramid as long as there's a base stone there to support it. Or if it's the capstone piece, it has to be lifted again from this site to this site, and then the workers in this site will lift the capstone onto the top of the pyramid, but the rest of the pyramid has to be built in order to support the capstone. So I'll explain more of that here in a minute. I'm just trying to give you an overview of the game board. So these lifter sites here can also hold workers, and there's no limit to how many workers can be in either of these lifter sites. We have our victory point track, which represents your favor with the pharaoh. That's going around the outside here. And the final part to talk about is this turn order grid up in the top right. Now, this is a really neat part of the game. Not only does this determine your turn order for each round, but it also gives each player a special ability for the round, and it tracks the progress of the game. Each column here represents 1 game round, and after 5 game rounds, we reset this board and we do it 1 more time. So the maximum game length will be 10 total rounds. 2 times through this grid. However, if the capstone gets placed on the pyramid and the pyramid gets built while we're playing the game, that will end the game right then and there, no matter what round we're in. So the game can end one of 2 ways, either after 10 rounds or when the capstone gets built. At that point, the player with the most points will be the winner. So now that you understand the board layout, let's go into what a game round looks like. The first part of the round is establishing your turn order. So starting with the start player, they will choose any empty spot in column 1. Remember, these columns represent the game rounds. So game round number 1, we use column 1. So the start player takes one of their player pawns from this supply and places it in an empty space in column 1. Then the next player in clockwise order chooses a different empty space in column 1, and so on around the table until each player has chosen 1 space in column 1. This will be your turn order for round 1, and this resolves from top to bottom. So in this example, blue will take the first turn, then beige, then red, then brown. Now after round 1, when we choose this for round 2, you don't go clockwise anymore. Instead, you use the reverse turn order from the previous round. So in round 2, brown will have their first choice of a space in column 2, then red, then beige, then blue. Then depending on which spaces those players select, round 3 will use round 2's reverse turn order to choose those spots in column 3, and so on for the rest of the game. So that's how you choose your turn order each round. Now notice each row has a unique special ability attached to it, and I'll explain those here in a little bit, but just know that when you place your pawn in a new column, you can never reuse one of the rows that you already used. For example, the blue player chose the number 3 box here, so for the rest of these turns, they cannot choose the number 3 box. Now, once we get through 5 rounds of the game, this whole grid will reset, and then we go into the second half of the game, which works the same way. You can start by choosing any space here, but then in the later rounds, you'll have to obey that same rule where you cannot reuse one of the rows. Now, you will not fully understand these special abilities until I explain the actions, but I'm going to go over these real quick, and then hopefully you can come back and reference this once you learn the actions. The first space says fish ×2, no farm. Now, this is actually somewhat of a penalty on your turn, and that's the trade-off for going first. This lets you fish twice, but you cannot farm, and as you'll see in a little bit, farming is better than fishing. The second space here says no bonus. So again, you don't get anything special, but it's kind of like you're going near the front of turn order. The next 4 have the little blue arrows, and those immediately happen as soon as you put your pawn on this space. So the support move lets you move one of your workers from one support camp to another. So you could move one worker from the artist camp over to the farming, or one worker from the farming to the raw temple, or however you want to do that. It's just one worker can move from one camp to another, and again, that happens the moment you select this square on the grid. The quarry move also triggers immediately when you select it. This lets you move one of your workers from one quarry site to another, or from one quarry site to any one of the support camps, or from any one of the support camps to a quarry site. You are not allowed to use this ability to move a worker between support camps. You can only do that with the support move, which we just talked about right here. The next one is called Lifter Move. This also triggers immediately when you select this. This lets you move a worker from a lifting camp up here to the other lifting camp, or from a lifting camp back to any one of the support camps, or from any one of the support camps to one of the lifter camps. Again, you cannot use this ability to move a worker between 2 support camps. The next one is another quarry move. This works the same way as the first quarry move. It just happens later in turn order. Next is farm ×2, no fish. This will let you farm twice on your turn, but you cannot fish. Now, this does not trigger right away. This is just when you take your turn, you're going to get to do the farm action twice. Normally, you can only do it once. However, as a trade-off, you cannot fish. But this is a very good way to get a lot of food, as you'll soon see. The last one is art ×2. That works the same way. Normally on your turn, you can only do the art action once. This lets you do the art action twice. And those are the special abilities on this track. Now, once this clears off after the 5th round, we do make a slight change to this table, and that's with this covering tile here. And this just adds an extra lifter action to the mix and removes one of the quarry actions. So those are all those special abilities. Now let's go back to our setup round. Remember, blue chose the first spot. That was a support move. So when blue chose this, they should have immediately moved one of their workers from a support camp to another support camp. Now that's optional, and on that first round of the game, you might not want to move anything, so maybe they just decided not to move a worker. The red player decided to go on farm ×2, so on the red player's turn, they can do the farm action twice, but they cannot fish. The brown player decided to go on the art ×2, and again, that happens on their turn. And finally, the beige player chose a quarry move, and they will immediately move one of their workers from the farming area onto this sled. And you'll see why that matters here in a moment. So now we take our player turns in this turn order. So blue goes first, then beige, then red, then brown. So what do you do on your turn? Well, first you choose up to 3 actions and perform them. Then you must nominate one sled to move or one stone to be lifted. And then finally, if a stone got lifted or if a sled moved beyond the quarry track, then you have to do a scoring. And then it becomes the next player's turn on the chart. So let's first talk about your 3 actions. The first action is farming. This is how you get more food. So if you farm, you take 1 food per worker that you have in the farming area. So right now I have 3 blue workers. I take 3 food from the supply and place it behind my screen. You can only farm once on your turn unless you are sitting on the farm ×2 action up here. The next way to get food is fishing. This works the same way as farming, except you only get half the food per worker you have there, and you have to round down. So if blue did the fishing action, they would only take 1 food for the fishing action because they only have 3 workers there. Half of 3 is 1.5, rounded down to 1. Again, you can only go fishing once on your turn unless you're sitting on this space in turn order, which lets you fish twice, but you cannot farm. And you'll see why you need food here in a little bit, but it's very important to get food in this game. One use for food is to make art. That's another action you can do on your turn. Making art you can only do once per turn, and on this action you count up the number of workers you have in the artist camp. For each worker you can spend 1 food to get 1 art. So if blue has 2 workers here, they could spend 2 food to the supply and take 2 art from the supply and put it behind their screen. You'll see why you need art a little later. So farming, fishing, and making art, those can each be done once per turn. Now let's look at some other possible actions like moving your workers. These can be done multiple times per turn. So you could do a support camp move, and it costs 1 action to move 1 worker from a support camp to another support camp. So for example, I could move this worker to the farming area for my first action, then do farming so that I get a little more food, and then move that worker back for my third action. That's just one of many possible examples. Another possible action is the quarry move. You can move 1 worker to another quarry or to a support camp, or from a support camp to a quarry. And it's worth noting that if you did a support move or a quarry move up here when you chose your turn order, that was not one of your 3 actions. That is a bonus action when you choose turn order. However, if you're sitting on one of the ×2 spaces up here, that would be 2 of your actions. If you farm twice, that's 2 of your 3 actions. You don't get a bonus action, you just get the ability to farm 2 times. It's also worth noting if you do the art ×2, you have to have enough food for both of those art transactions. The last possible action for your turn is moving onto the quarry track and moving up this track, but you can only do this if the sled is farther forward. You can never jump in front of the sled. So let's say the sled is up here. You could use 3 action points to do something like this. 1, 2, 3, and jump right onto the sled. Just remember, each space maxes out at 4 workers. So if there are already 4 workers on that sled, you cannot join them. And it's also worth noting you can never move backwards on this quarry track. So once you start moving toward the pyramid, you have to keep going forward. Now there is a rare situation that could happen sometimes. If your worker's on the quarry track and the sled is ahead of you, but the sled gets delivered, I'll talk about the delivery later, but when that happens, the sled returns to the quarry site, and any workers sitting on that quarry site will immediately join the sled. However, any workers ahead of that sled on that track could be run over if that sled starts moving. So if my worker was here and the sled reset and then it started moving again, if it runs over me, I don't join the sled. I instead get bumped back to the raw temple. So if I'm here and the sled is behind me, strategically, I might want to just let it run me over and knock me back. Or I could try to move forward before the sled moves, just walk off the edge of the quarry track, and then either jump up here to one of the lifter sites or jump back down to one of the support sites. So from here, it would be 1 action to jump up here or 1 action to jump down here. So that's the only way you would ever have a worker out in front of the sled. You can't voluntarily move a worker off the sled and start walking ahead of it. So those are some really intricate, situational rules that might happen, but I just want to cover them all because I do want to do a complete tutorial here. And I might as well note one more little rules wrinkle, and that is, remember I said each of these squares can hold a maximum of 4 workers. Well, if you had a situation like this, you can move through this square, you just can't end on this square. So you could use 2 of your actions to go 1, 2, and that would be perfectly fine. And those are all your possible actions on your turn. Again, you get 3 actions to spend. You can farm, fish, make art, or move. And there are lots of ways you can move, but each step of movement is 1 action. And another note, you cannot move workers between these lifter camps, and you cannot move workers off of the lifter camps as part of your main actions. The only way to manipulate your workers up here is by choosing the lifter move during turn order. So a typical turn with 3 actions, might look something like this: move, move, and farm, and then you would get 6 food. Or move, move, make art, and you could spend 4 food to get 4 art. Or move and then farm ×2 if you're on this space, and that player would get 8 food. Or move and make art ×2, and that player could spend 3 food to get 3 art, and then another 3 food to get 3 more art, and that would be their 3 actions. Or you could just use all 3 actions to move, like 1, 2, 3, or something like that. So there are lots of ways you can allocate those 3 actions, but it's very quick. I had a lot of little rules to cover there, but that part of your turn is just boom, 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 3 actions, and then you're done. Then you move on to step 2, which is where you must nominate a sled to move or a stone to be lifted. And this is where the game gets really good. So let's say blue nominates this sled to move. Now, for a sled to move, there have to be at least 3 workers on the sled. But remember, a sled can never have more than 4 workers. So any sled that has 3 or 4 workers, you can nominate. And it doesn't even have to have any of your workers on it, although usually you want to. Now, when you nominate a sled to move, all the players who have workers on that sled will now contribute some food to the workers to help it move. What's cool about this is each player makes their food contribution one at a time, going clockwise around the table. And then all that food is pooled together into a collective effort. And depending on how much food was submitted by all the players, that determines how far the sled moves. Furthermore, if not enough food was submitted collectively, then the workers starve, and whoever contributed the least food loses their worker off that sled. And you can strategically use that to try to starve out your opponents. It's very cool. So let me show you an example. This is much easier to see. Let's say, the blue player nominated this sled to move. You start with the player clockwise of the player who nominated the sled. So the blue player nominated the sled, then it goes to red. If red has a worker on that sled, they are now allowed to contribute up to 2 food per worker they have on that sled. Red has 1 worker on the sled, but maybe they look at me and see that I have 2 workers on the sled, so maybe they're going to be cheap and say, I'm not going to offer any food to this effort. So then it goes to the brown player. They have no workers on the sled, so they don't bid any food. Then it goes to beige. They have 1 worker there. They can throw in up to 2 food. Now let's say they decide to be helpful and they add 2 food. Now for this sled to move at all, we have to get a combined food value of at least 4. So if I want the sled to move, I have to add at least 2 more food to this, because right now this player added 0, this player added 2. I would have to add at least 2 to get that total up to 4. If your total value is 4 or 5 food, the sled moves 1 space. If it's 6 or 7 food, the sled moves 2 spaces. And if it's 8 food, the sled moves 3 spaces. Now the most food I can add is 4, because you can only add up to 2 per worker. So if I want the sled to move 2 spaces, I would have to add 4 food, because that would be a combined total of 6 food. Now, I have some other options as well. I could simply throw in 2 food, and that would move the sled 1 space. Or I could be mean and add 1 food. And here's what would happen in that situation. If I just add 1 food, now our collective total is 3. The sled does not move and the workers starve. In this case, the player who threw in the least amount of food gets kicked off the sled and they go back to the farming area. And if multiple players bid the least amount of food, then all those low bidders would be kicked off. So in our previous example, if red added 0 food and beige added 0 food, and then I threw in 1 food, well, red and beige submitted the least, they would both be kicked off. And likewise, if we all bid 0 food for some reason, then we all would have to lose 1 worker off the sled, and I would be the only one left on there, and then other opportunistic opponents would probably try to jump on board and take over that sled. And even if we all bid 1 food, that would not be enough to move the sled, and we would also starve and have to lose 1 worker. So lots of ways that can play out, and you really have to take advantage of that clockwise seating order when you choose a sled to nominate. And it's important to note that any food the players offered there is lost back to the supply. So whether they were successful or not, all that food goes away. So you have to constantly weigh, do you want your opponents riding on that sled with you, or do you want to try to starve them out? And then your opponents know this as well. So there's all these awesome mind games that happen during that phase of the game. And you have to remember, the food offering happens clockwise from the player who nominates the sled to move. But the sled nominator gets to bid last. So they can kind of wait around and see what everybody else decides to do. And sometimes there's even some negotiation that happens between the players. If you add 2 food, I'll add 2 food, but then when all the other players throw in a lot of food, it gets to you. You're always tempted to not add anything because the sled's already going to move and you're not going to starve. So there's some really good stuff that happens during that part of the game, and that happens on every player's turn, because after you do your actions, you always have to nominate a sled to move or a stone to be lifted. Now, the stone lifting works basically the same way. You have to have at least 3 workers in that camp, and then you do that food bidding thing the same way. You can bid up to 2 food per worker, and then if you have a total of at least 4 food, it's a successful lift, and then the stone gets placed onto the pyramid. Now, I'll show you more how that works here in just a moment. Bear with me here. So after step 2 of your turn, that is, nominating a sled to move or a stone to be lifted, then you move on to step 3 and you have to check to see if there's a scoring. Now, here's what triggers a scoring. Anytime the sled moves past this space of the quarry, or anytime we have a successful lift from one of these lift camps. Now, these are much easier to see with an example, so let me just fast forward to a game in progress and I will show you how this part works. So let's say we're a few rounds into the game and this sled just got nominated to move. This player threw in 1 food, this player threw in 2 food, and this player threw in 1 food. So we have 4 food. That means the sled moves 1 space. It's going to move off the quarry track, and now what happens next depends on what type of stone is on the sled. If it's a base level stone, it gets delivered directly to the pyramid site. However, if it's a mid-level stone or the capstone, it gets delivered to this lifting site. Regardless of what stone got delivered, now you have to pause and do a scoring. And we do this scoring called push to camp or pyramid. We count the workers that were on the sled, and whoever had the most workers there gets 6 points. Second most workers gets 3 points. Third most gets 1 point. In our example, blue had 2, red had 1, and beige had 1. Blue had the most workers, they get 6 points right now. Red and beige tied for second place. They get to split the second and third most points. So you add 3 plus 1, 4, and split that. So they each get 2 points. Now, if 2 players tie for first, then you add first plus second place together, which is 9, and split that evenly, rounding down. So both of those players would get 4 points, and then the next player would only get the 1 for third most. So you just have to kind of shift that table down depending on how the players tie. It's also worth noting if you're the only player with workers on a sled and you push it over that threshold, you're going to get the solo bonus. So you actually get 6 plus 4, which is 10 points for delivering a sled by yourself. After we score for pushing that sled off the track, we have to reassign the workers that were on the sled. Starting with the player to the left of whoever nominated the sled to be moved, that player reassigns any workers they had on that sled to any spaces on the board except the quarries. So they cannot put them on any of the quarry spaces or the quarry tracks, but they can put them down here in the support camps or in either of these lifting camps. So you go clockwise around the table until each player has reassigned all the workers that were on that sled. Then whoever nominated that sled push returns the sled back to the starting space, and if there are any workers on that space, they immediately jump on that sled. And now that same player gets to choose any remaining stone from the supply and place it on the sled. Now remember I said if you deliver a base stone, it goes immediately to the pyramid site. So that player that nominated the push, they get to decide where that base stone gets placed. And again, this is done after the players reassign their workers that were on that sled. So when the player builds a base level stone, they can put it on any one of the 4 corners of this building site. If there's already a base stone there and they decide to link it side by side, that is called a pyramid row. And whenever a row is formed, that triggers an art round. We have to decorate that side of the pyramid. So there will be 2 rows on the bottom, this one and this one, 2 rows on the middle, this one and this one, and then the capstone is also considered a row, so you would also do an art for the capstone as well. So let me show you how we decorate the pyramid. This is done in a blind bid, so the players gather up some of their art behind their screen and put it in a closed fist. Everybody simultaneously reveals their art, and whoever bids the most art gets 6 points. Second most gets 3 points. Third most gets 1 point. Any ties are resolved the exact same way that I just showed you on that previous scoring. So the players will move up their markers on the victory point track, and any art that the players bid is lost back to the supply. So just like the food bidding, the art bidding is almost more painful because you do that in a blind bid. You're not quite sure how much your opponents are going to bid, and the art is like an extra step. You have to get food first and then get art, and have that art saved up so that when a row gets complete, you can bid a lot. But if you don't bid enough, you're wasting all that art and you're not getting the full points. And that is absolutely brutal when that happens, because you want to save some art for those other art rounds too. Sometimes, the players will waste all their art and then you might try to rush and get another stone up there so that you can get another row complete real quick before everybody has a chance to get more art. And then if the capstone gets built, that art bid is worth even more points. You'll see here, whoever bids most for the capstone art gets 10 points, and then 6, and then 3. So you're always tempted to save some back, but then you don't even know if the capstone is going to be built because the game ends after 10 rounds, regardless of if the pyramid gets finished. So there's some risk reward there to weigh. And you also have to keep in mind that the player who nominated the sled to be pushed out of the quarry gets to decide where that base stone sets. So if they don't have a lot of art right now, maybe they place it on the corner like this so that we don't trigger an art bid yet. So many ways you can play this. Such a cool design. I'm getting off topic here. Let's get back to the rules. After you check for an art bid, now you have to see if an entire tier of the pyramid got finished. So the bottom tier would be all 4 blocks. The middle tier would be all 4 of these blocks, and the capstone would be its own tier. As soon as a tier gets completed, we do a Temple of Ra scoring. And at this moment, you count all the workers in the temple. Whoever has the most workers gets 6 points, second most gets 3, etc., just like we did on the push scoring. It's worth noting you do not have to build this pyramid one tier at a time, so you could add a middle stone on top of a base stone before that whole base level is complete. So after you check for the art bid and the Temple of Ra scoring, that would be the end of your turn. Then it becomes the next player according to the turn order. They would start by choosing 3 actions and then nominating either a sled to move or a stone to be lifted. Now, just to clarify on the lifting of the stones. So if you nominate a stone to be lifted, the way this works is, you do that food bid just like you do with the sled push, but you have to have a combined total of at least 4. If you don't have 4, the stone stays put and your workers starve. Whoever contributed the least food loses their worker back to the farming area. And again, if multiple players bid the least, then each one of those players would have to lose a worker. Now, this is one other way to get workers out of these lifting sites, because remember, it's kind of hard once you commit a worker to a lifting site. The only way you can get them out of there is to go up here and do a lifter move. But if your workers starve, they will be reset to the bottom of the board. So strategically, you could starve yourself to get your workers back and do some more farming. So many ways you can play this. Anyway, if you have a successful lift, meaning 4 or more combined food, then whoever nominated that lift gets to place that stone on the pyramid, or if it's the capstone, it gets moved from here to the next lifting site. And both of those scenarios would be considered a successful lift from the middle lift camp right here. When you have a successful lift from the middle camp, you have to score it. You look at whoever contributed the most food. That player scores 6 points. Whoever contributed the second most food scores 3, and third most scores 1. Again, you conduct ties the exact same way as all the other scorings. Now remember, you're only allowed to contribute up to 2 food per worker you have in that work camp, just like when we moved the sled. So the bidding is done the same way. You go clockwise, starting at the player to the left of whoever nominated the lift. They offer their food first, and you go clockwise around the table. Whoever has workers in that lifting camp can offer up to 2 food per worker. So yes, you only need 4 to lift it successfully, but really you're trying to bid the most food so you get those 6 points. And any food that's bid is lost, just like we did before. So that's kind of a twist on how you score it. Now, when you nominate the capstone to be lifted, it can only be built on the pyramid when it's lifted from this site. So again, it goes here first, then it has to be nominated to lift from here to here, and that would be considered a middle lift scoring. And then it would have to be nominated again to be moved from here onto the pyramid, but you can only do that if all the rest of the blocks are already on the pyramid. When you do that final lift, putting the capstone onto the pyramid, the scoring is enhanced and it jumps up to that 10-6-3, and that's called the final lift. As soon as that capstone gets placed successfully onto the pyramid, first you will do your scoring for the final lift, and that's based on how much food the players bid. Then you have to decorate the capstone, so you do one more art bid. That's a blind bid in a closed fist. Everybody reveals simultaneously, and whoever bids the most gets 10 points for the capstone. Second most gets 6, then 3, then 1, like we talked about earlier. Finally, you do one more Temple of Ra scoring, and that's based on the number of workers in the temple right now. Gets 6, 3, and 1 for first, second, and third most. And that would be the end of the game. At that point, the player with the most points is the winner. If there's a tie for most points, then whoever among the tied players has the most combined art and food behind their player screen, they would break the tie. And don't forget, the game will end also if you just play through 10 rounds and the pyramid's still not complete. Then at the end of the 10th round, the player with the most points wins, and you do the same tiebreaker. And that is how you play Giza, the Great Pyramid. I think I did a pretty clean tutorial. I hope you were able to follow all that. I know it seems like this game has a lot of fiddly rules, which I typically hate, but I promise you, the game is very simple when you sit down and play it. It just seems like a lot, and I wanted to cover all those little situational rules, but really it's a very simple structure here, and you're doing the same thing round after round after round. Now there's lots of different stuff going on in the game where you have to maneuver and do different things, but I'm just saying the structure of the game is very rigid, and by the third round I think you'll have the structure and the game flow really locked into your mind. Now it's going to take a learning game or two to figure out how to properly strategize in this game, and I can bet your first play of this will be very humbling. You'll think you can do all this cool stuff, and you will be severely punished by, overbidding on your food and overbidding on your art and just not getting any points out of it. You will be kicked off of sleds. There will be sleds that fill up and you can't even join because they max out at 4. There will be times when you think you can get a sled pushed all the way by yourself and get that solo bonus, but you're running low on food, and then another player comes running up the quarry track and they're going to jump on that sled with you and piggyback off your hard work and prevent you from getting that solo bonus. There will be times when players force you to spend more food than you want to just so you don't starve, and that whole bidding system is so brutal and mean in the best way imaginable because you can force other players into, protecting themselves. It's like, oh, if I put 2 food in, then I am guaranteed not to starve, but if I only put 1 food in, maybe I can rely on everybody else, or if I'm last, I can wait and see, how much food the other players contribute, and then maybe I'm the jerk and I don't add any, and the sled moves because they all contributed their food. That part of the game is so good. You have to experience that. But really, the whole game is filled with excitement and tension from start to finish. You have this really enjoyable progression that happens throughout the game where you're always, shifting your focus. It's like, oh, the pyramid's getting built. This stone's about to be delivered up here. Maybe I better get some, workers down here in the temple. Maybe I better get some workers up here in these lifting sites, even though when you put them up there, they become trapped and then it's hard to get them out of there. But if your opponent has 3, it's like, I can't let them, get the most food bid. So I got to get 3 up there as well. So much player-driven decision making where you're just trying to reposition your workers at different moments depending on the current game state. And it's really cool how this little mini world comes to life in front of you on the table. People down here farming and fishing and making art. You've got these guys pushing sleds forward. You've got these guys lifting stones and building the pyramid. It's like this whole world that the designer created with some very simple mechanisms like worker placement, bidding, and some area majority. All that comes together beautifully in what I consider a 10 out of 10. I'm giving this an A+. I really have nothing bad to say about this game. It's mean, it's unforgiving, it's ruthless, no mercy type of game here, and it just works. I don't know how else to explain it. It just works. Everything meshes beautifully. All the mechanisms fit together. It's thematic, it makes sense what you're trying to do in the game, and I don't even care that much about theme usually, but this game I really feel like the theme is strong here. There's so much metagame that comes to life between the players that, I can't even really showcase in a video. You just have to sit down and experience the way the game pulls you in all those different directions. And even though you have a strategy in place, your opponents are constantly getting in the way of that plan and you have to adapt to them. Oh no, that stone's going to be built. We're getting ready to do an art scoring. I don't have any art. I better, move my workers down here, farm so I can make art. And it's that feeling of constantly chasing after all these things you need to do, but you just don't have enough workers or time to get it done. So it can feel frustrating, but to me, this game just rocks. I really like everything about this. So don't miss GIZA the Great Pyramid. I can't believe this game is not more well known. It did get a little bit of buzz from what I can tell, back in 2012. Some of the bigger YouTube channels did review it, and they really liked it, by the way. But for whatever reason, this game just never went anywhere beyond that. So I'm here to breathe some life back into this little gem, and just beware, it is very cutthroat and very in your face. Definitely not a family game night type of game, that's for sure. So hopefully you were able to follow this tutorial today. I think I did a clean tutorial, but as always, check the video description for any rules clarifications or little mistakes I might have made. I always post those updates in the video description. And while you're in the description, check out all the membership info. It's less than the cost of a board game to support this channel for an entire year to help keep it alive. And where else can you become a UGOG? I'm sure the fellow UGOGs would welcome you with open arms if you decide to become a member, and I certainly would too. So thank you for considering that. And speaking of members, make sure you all check that post tab on the channel homepage. I recently posted about a special opportunity that all the members can participate in. You just have to do it by October 31st. So make sure you check the post tab on the channel homepage if you're a member. And that is all for this episode. Thanks for learning about GIZA the Great Pyramid with me today. I think I'm going to have to shuffle some games around in my top 50 and make room for this guy because this is such a banger. listener. Does this look like a game you would like to try? Does it remind you of any other games you've ever seen? And what is your favorite pyramid building game? And all that good board game related stuff, drop it in the comments below. I would love to read about it. Thanks for being here, everybody. I'll be back with another great Undiscovered game on episode 77 coming out in a few weeks. We'll see you then.